Welcome back. President Trump's frustration with the growing number of congressional investigations on full display today. He declared on Twitter, quote, "You can't investigate and legislate simultaneously. It just doesn't work that way." Well, USA Today reporter Gregory Court was quick to respond and point out, even during the Watergate hearings, the 93rd Congress passed and Nixon signed Federal Aid to Highways Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 73, Endangered Species Act, Budget Act of 74. Oh, and by the way, the War Powers Resolution over the president's veto. All these laws still exist in some form today. On a night like this, we're so fortunate to be joined by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Jon Meacham. Notably, he is the co-author of a recent book called Impeachment: An American History. Jon, I am told by a reliable source you have arrived tonight with a quote from one George Mason.
And who else I would submit would bring this to you of a Wednesday? And I know that's exciting for you and everybody else. George Mason, in the Constitutional Convention, said, "Who shall be above justice?" And the last person on earth who can be above justice is the person who has the capacity to do the most extensive injustice. It was a triumvirate debate about impeachment in the beginning between James Madison and Edmund Randolph and George Mason, really trying to figure out what would, in the Republican system of checks and balances, what would the impeachment function be? And it's inherently political, as we've discussed. It's been used for political purposes through the years. But one of the things that came to a head today, I think, particularly with the case where the President of the United States walks out of a meeting with those who are empowered under the Constitution under Article 1 and says, "I'm not going to work with you." At some point, you have to begin to seriously consider, if you are those Article 1 folks, to what extent is the political situation such that you have a constitutional duty to fulfill what was debated and decided upon between those founders so long ago. And it strikes me, and it's easy for me to say, I don't have to face the voters, but it strikes me that if I were a member of the House of Representatives right now, I would be inclined to proceed, at least to have hearings on impeachment, given that the president, we have evidence of attempted obstruction, and we also have the political box checked, which is he's not, in fact, he's saying he's not going to do his job because people are investigating him. And that's a fundamental prima facie violation of the rule of law.
So put another way, we Americans who will not be the recipients of improved interstate highway systems and new tunnels and bridges and airports, we are that's being withheld from us. He is not fulfilling his role as president, is the view, and that's what congressional Democrats could operate on.
Absolutely. It's very interesting, if you're keeping score at home, that Speaker Pelosi, I think to Mika Brzezinski this week, said he's not obeying his oath of office. That, to me, was a very important political moment because the Speaker's been fairly careful about not wanting to proceed on impeachment because of a political understanding, which we can argue about. But there is this oath of office argument that he's not protecting, defending the Constitution, and in fact is not, at least threatening to not execute his duties here. This reminds me nothing less, and obviously Nixon is top of mind for everybody, but this is really Andrew Johnson. This is really 151 years ago. Andrew Johnson gave speeches where he attacked Congress. He lashed out about conspiracy theories. He really did. In fact, many of the articles of impeachment against Andrew Johnson was Congress listing the attacks he made on them that weren't entirely dissimilar from the ones we've seen today. So I think a lot of folks, if they can stand it, should do a little bit of reading on what happened with Andrew Johnson, what happened with Nixon, because I suspect we're pretty close here.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.